The world has come to a standstill with US elections being held. Biden is projected to win with Donald Trump crying out foul. What does this mean for the multicultural communities in Edmonton and Canada, and for Alberta as a whole?
Hi, I'm Najib Jutt. I'm a political strategist with Statecraft Partners here in Edmonton, Alberta. Happy to be on Diversity Plus TV. The silver lining is that if the Republican Party sees that they actually have a much more diverse voter base and they can actually increase the amount of overall broad appeal they have in communities of color, then maybe they will back off a little bit about with the divisive rhetoric, with the dog whistle politics. So that's the hope, that they see an opportunity here that they can attract a more diverse voter and see that that voter is very different from the typical voter that they catered to before. That's the silver lining. Now, obviously, this has huge implication in terms of the race relations and the other things, that the tensions that we've seen in the U.S., and we can't allow that to continue. And that also has implications for us here in Canada as well, that a re-elected Trump could embolden even further things like the neo-Nazi movement and the alt-right movement that we're already seeing, the increase in hate crimes and other incidents here in Canada as well. So that's the risk. So the price is pretty high. But I think that overall, this may, if a loss for the Republican Party, a loss for Trump, may allow the Republicans now to reflect on what does this mean in terms of changing and growing their demographic and their typical voter. And also, a loss or a win even for the Democrats, right? The Democrats now have to really do some reflection and thinking about why this was so close. Why did they lose so many people from communities of color, and what they need to do now to reposition themselves to attract those communities back to the Democratic tent. It's looking like at this time that Biden probably has the most likely chance to succeed and to win the presidency. So I think that's going to have some ramifications in terms of trade relations with the U.S. He's already on record saying that he would kill the Keystone Pipeline Agreement, so that has ramifications for our oil and gas sector. Whether or not he goes through with that, or if our prime minister and our ministers are able to convince him, maybe not, because I think that the U.S. is starting to understand that the price of shale and the cost of extracting shale is, much greater than just buying the crude from Canada. So hopefully those conversations continue, because I really think that a pipeline of our crude to the U.S. is probably the best way to reinvigorate our oil and gas economy. I think in terms of a Biden presidency, I do think that may at least push the alt-right movement and the neo-Nazi movement and some of the other things that we're seeing back underground, because they won't be as emboldened they were before. But I also believe that maybe it's too late for that the lid is off of Pandora's box in terms of those kinds of incidents and the rise of these movements, which are also allowed to happen because of social media. So I don't know. I don't know if we can put the lid back on where we are now in terms of race relations, and those things might continue, and it might be too late to diffuse those things, because at the end of the day, whether it's Biden or Trump, the victory was narrow enough to show these groups that there is still a voice and an opportunity for them. So we'll have to see what happens there and contend with it. Obviously we shouldn't take our foot off the gas in terms of quashing and doing what we can to not allow these types of outright groups to organize and mobilize. And I think in terms of future elections, it looks like we probably will have a federal election next year. I don't think that this minority government can continue for much longer after that. Either the Liberal Party will be looking at securing a majority, or the opposition will look at looking at having an election and getting a shot at replacing them. So we can look, I think, forward to that next year. We have municipal elections scheduled for October of 2021 for all of Alberta. So those are already gearing up. And I think regardless of what happens, Trump winning or losing, his ability to mobilize and make it as close as he has been able to do, I think that is going to embolden that same sort of rhetoric that we've seen coming into the U.S. now, with politicians positioning themselves as strong men like of Trump, and using divisive politics to mobilize a base. I think we're going to continue. We've already starting to see that in municipal politics, with candidates trying to position themselves and speak to a particular audience, and position themselves as the only one that can make the tough decisions and do the difficult things that are required for everyday working people. So those things, that type of rhetoric is always highly divisive. It always pits communities against each other. I don't see that changing, because unfortunately it has been successful, not just in the US, but it has been to some degree successful in Canada as well, whenever candidates have positioned themselves with these, so it's always an interesting mix, strong man of the people sort of a positioning, right, which we've seen over and over again all over the world. My closing comments would be that if anything that is to be gained from this election in the US is that we've shown that community of colors are coming into their own in terms of their political power. We've shown that we can organize and mobilize. And I think that we shouldn't just look at what's happening in the presidential race, but we should look at what's happening at the state and municipal level with candidates that make up the squad, for example, Rashida Tlaib, Ilan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and these kinds of candidates, women of color who've been able to mobilize and win decisively, and also help the Democratic Party win because of their decisive wins in the states that matter. So I think this shows that communities of colors are starting to flex their political power. We're becoming aware of how the systems work and how we can use those systems to our advantage. We're trying to understand the impact of our numbers. So I don't think we should get too caught up in, that the Black community voted from 12% in 2016 to 18% in 2022. I don't think that's what's important. I think what's important is to realize that we are increasing in numbers. I think that, for example, women in the Latin community now represented over 1 million votes versus 2016. Like, those things are the powerful messages that we need to understand, and we need to also replicate in the US, is the fact that we can mobilize. Our numbers are so great that we can affect the outcomes of elections, and understand what that means and how we use that to the benefit and advantage to our communities.